The day Grandma Mira turned 81, a soft apricot dawn spread over the valley between Orilla and Bracken. From Mira's porch on the Orilla side, the river looked like a quiet silver snake, but 2 generations of quarrels had turned it into a border colder than iron. No bridge connected the banks now. Bracken's steeples rose at the far end, misty and unreachable, as if peering from a half-remembered dream. "Tell me again why we never cross," 9-year-old Lark asked, dragging a wooden stool to Grandma's wicker chair. The child's dark curls were wild in the morning breeze, her fingers still sticky from breakfast honey. Mira sighed. "If you piece together a history long enough, sweetling, you'll find knots no one bothered to loosen. People got hurt, so they tied the rope tighter." Lark frowned. "But knots can be untied. They can." Mira placed a skein of deep blue yarn in Lark's lap. "And sometimes, if the rope frays, you spin it into something new." Every year, Mira knitted scarves for the winter fair. This season, instead of her usual neat bundles, a bold idea had begun to flicker in her thoughts, one that kept her awake through the creaking hours past midnight. What if she and Lark made a scarf that stretched the entire valley? Something so long it could drape from Orilla's bluff, glide across the river's narrowest bend, and land on Bracken's wharf. A ridiculous dream, yet it felt less ridiculous when Lark gently squeezed her arthritic hand. "Grandma," she whispered, "let's start a really big one this time. I mean really big." Mira chuckled, pulled out her weathered knitting needles, and tapped each against Lark's smaller pair. "Every stitch will need a story," she said. "Deal?" Lark's eyes shone. "Deal." They began with a simple garter stitch. Click, slide, loop. The blue thread unspooled, catching the rising sun. The first story Mira told was older than both towns. "When I was small, as you," she said, "the river had no name. Fisherfolk from both banks cast nets side by side, and we tried not to tangle lines. Your great-grandpa liked to say the river didn't belong to anyone. It belonged to the moon who tugged its tides." Lark knitted slowly, careful not to tighten the stitches. "So what changed?" "A flood," Mira replied. "It swept away crops on Bracken's side, but spared Orilla. Worried townsfolk accused us of raising the levee higher. Ugly words were flung, stones hurled, and soon everyone forgot how to share riverbanks." Lark paused mid-row. "Grandma, did anyone try to explain the levee was just luck?" "Some did, but grief muffles ears." Mira sighed. "Keep knitting, sweetling. Let's put a stitch of empathy here." The scarf's first yard was finished by lunch. They spread it over porch planks. It glimmered like a fallen piece of sky. Neighbors strolled past, raised eyebrows, and asked what in the world they were making. Mira answered with a smile, a bridge of warmth. Word of the project flitted along Orilla's streets. By afternoon, 2 teens biked over with spare yarn balls, emerald, cherry, sunflower. They settled cross-legged beside Mira and Lark, eager to help. Mira directed them. "Each color needs a story, children. Speak as you knit." Misael, the older teen, chose emerald. "My mom's from Bracken," he admitted softly. "She hasn't visited since her wedding because Grandpa swore never to step on Orilla soil again. But she keeps a tin box of Bracken River stones under her bed. She shakes them sometimes, says the water songs resound inside." He told how every New Year's Eve his mother placed a stone on the windowsill facing the river and whispered blessings for relatives unseen. Misael knitted this memory into the scarf, each green loop a wish for reunion. The second teen, Tulla, who wore headphones around her neck, chose cherry yarn. "My father's a ferryman without a ferry," she said with a wry grin. "He inherited an old boat but won't use it. He says crossing passengers would invite trouble." Tulla braided her rose fast, red and determined. "I dream of reviving that boat. Maybe this scarf will float like a ribbon over water and show him the river isn't cursed." As sunset gilded the porch, the scarf measured 15 yards. Lark danced circles around it, marveling at the kaleidoscope of tales tied into its length. She plopped beside Grandma, cheeks flushed. "At this rate, we'll finish in a week." Mira laughed softly. "Oh, darling, we'll need miles. But you see how hands multiply? Stories attract storytellers. The next morning, they shifted operations to the town square for space. Mira sat beneath the bronze statue of Orilla's founder, ironically, a man who had once courted a Bracken schoolteacher. Lark anchored the rolling basket of yarns. Volunteers arrived, bakers on break, postmen between routes, students after classes. Some had never knitted but learned quickly, guided by seasoned fingers. Everyone spoke as they stitched. A baker recalled the shared seed vault once maintained by both towns before suspicion split the custodianship. A retired teacher confessed she secretly mailed lesson plans to her Bracken counterpart when textbooks grew scarce there. Laughter melded with sorrow, loops entwined with longing. In Bracken, rumors of a scarf bridge reached the market square via traveling tinkerers. Some scoffed, calling it a publicity stunt, but curiosity sprouted. One windy afternoon, a Bracken woman named Alma stood on the opposite bank, shading her eyes to glimpse the distant throng of knitters. Alma was Mira's estranged younger sister. For 40 years, the siblings hadn't exchanged a winter card. After the flood accusations, Alma had stayed in Bracken to marry a local carpenter while Mira followed her heart to Orilla. Each believed the other had shut the door. Now, Alma's granddaughter, Sarah, tugged her sleeve. Gran, she asked, why don't we knit too? It looks fun. Alma's stern expression softened. We'd need needles long as hope, she murmured. But that night, she rummaged through cedar chests, retrieving ivory needles polished smooth by time. Sarah clapped with delight. Soon, on Bracken's cobblestones, another group of knitters gathered, mirroring the Orilla circle. Alma suggested they start from their bank, knit toward the river. Then, and here she hesitated, they'd wait for the other side's length to meet them halfway. Mira learned of this when a messenger pigeon fluttered to her window, bearing a simple note. I still remember how you taught me the fisherman's knot. Mira pressed the paper to her lips. She whispered to Lark, old divides might tremble tonight. Day followed day. Autumn leaves burned gold and drifted between towns like silent applause. The scarf bulged by hundreds of yards. To keep it untangled, participants rolled completed sections into giant spools that children carted to the riverfront. Bonded by common mission, Orilla and Bracken knitters began yelling greetings across water, voices echoing. On the 7th evening, Lark and Sarah approached the narrowest bend simultaneously, each escorting a spool taller than themselves. They raised hands in shy salute. A hush fell on both shores. Grandma Mira arrived, breathless, balancing a lantern. Alma appeared opposite with her own flame. The sisters locked eyes across the gloom. Memories flooded, braiding each other's hair, whispering secrets atop hay bales, quarreling over the flood's blame, then decades of silence. Alma lifted her voice. I spun merino for you. She held up a skein, moon-white. Mira swallowed tears. And I spun midnight alpaca for you. The granddaughters anchored post into the soil. The scarf's Orilla section was looped around one, Bracken's around the other, tension singing between them. They were perhaps 30 yards short of touch. We're close, Lark said, eyes sparkling. Needs more stories, Mira answered. She beckoned Alma. Come over tomorrow. Bring coffee cake. We'll finish together. Gasps rippled along Orilla's crowd. Crossing had not occurred in decades. But Alma smiled. The river can't drown sisters, she declared. See you at dawn. Overnight, town councils convened emergency meetings fearful of unauthorized bridging. Some officials argued the scarf was unsafe. Others called it illegal transportation. Yet they couldn't halt wordless momentum. The valley thrummed with anticipation. At dawn, fog coiled over water. Alma pushed a rowboat from Bracken's pier, Sarah at her side. Mira and Lark waited on Orilla's shore, scarf in their arms. The townsfolk lined both banks in silence. Halfway across, Alma paused. She pulled a battered music box from her coat, wound its key. A lullaby floated over the river, one their mother had sung when storms rattled windows. Mira closed her eyes, soaking the fragile notes, and memories glistened like dew. The sisters met, where the current was gentle, roped their boats together and began knitting the final span right there, needles clicking in midstream. Lark and Sarah helped, ferrying yarn bundles under oars like secret treasures. Story by story, stitch by stitch, the scarf inched toward unity. Mira spoke of the time she met Alma's carpenter husband in the market. He had given her a carved whistle as peace offering, but she was too startled to accept. Alma confessed she'd kept her side of the whistle pair, waiting. The sisters finished a stripe in shining teak brown, dedicating it to him, now past. Alma recounted Bracken's annual lantern ritual, originally shared with Orilla until the feud. Lark suggested reviving it valley-widely. The idea sprouted golden stitches. Hours slipped. Crowds on both banks merged into one great hush. Hearts knitting invisible patterns of their own, children perched on shoulders, elders clasped hands. Officials who once fretted found themselves spellbound. At last, with the afternoon sun turning the water into hammered copper, the scarf's two ends touched. Mira tied a fisherman's knot, strong, simple, forgiving. Alma tied hers alongside it. Together they wove a final row of alternating colors, blue for river, white for merino moon, midnight for regrets finely voiced. A cheer erupted so loud birds lifted from reeds. The scarf spanned the river, anchored to posts hammered deep into each shore. It sagged gently, not high enough to walk upon, but more than symbolic, wide enough for two people to crawl across if they wished, and bright enough to be seen for miles. "We've bridged it," Lark whispered, voice trembling. Yet the work wasn't done. Mira raised a hand. "A bridge of yarn needs the strength of promises." She turned toward Orilla's mayor, who stood among onlookers. "We need a real bridge, too. Stone or steel, built by both towns. This scarf is our blueprint," Alma echoed across water. "Let committees begin tonight. Meanwhile, we'll keep knitting. Let it drape from our rooftops, wrap around sore memories until they thaw." Days became weeks. The scarf remained, visited by school groups, painted by local artists. Weatherproof varnish concocted by chemistry teachers sealed fibers. At dusk, lanterns dangled from the link, tiny galaxies swaying in breeze. People timidly pulled themselves hand over hand across, exchanging pies, letters, and hugs, laughing at how surprisingly sturdy warmth could be. One snowy afternoon, construction equipment rumbled at the valley floor. Joint venture signed by both councils. But engineers admitted something profound. The scarf's measured arc outlined the optimal path for a pedestrian bridge. They incorporated its gentle slope into blueprints, pledging to preserve the original yarn inside glass balustrades once the bridge was finished, so travelers could walk beside the tangible chronicle of reconciliation. Meanwhile, volunteers maintained the scarf. When threads frayed, knitters fixed them, adding new stories. A couple engaged atop the midpoint, a composer premiering Ode to the River Unnamed, a baker from Bracken and a chef from Orilla launching a shared cafe on a floating barge. The cafe's opening day was crisp, sky-white as parchment. Mira, leaning on Lark's arm, crossed the scarf slowly, joints aching, yet spirit buoyant. Amma met her halfway. They navigated to the barge where they were offered steaming mugs of cocoa sprinkled with marigold petals. Reporters from distant cities snapped photos, asked how a piece of fabric could mend decades of resentment. Mira answered, "It's not fabric alone, it's listening." Each loop holds someone's breath, confession, apology. You wrap enough of those together and you get forgiveness long enough to span any chasm, the journalist scribbled. Fabric of forgiveness. Winter yielded to early spring. Wild irises opened along the riverbank, leaning toward the scarf as though seeking conversation. The new pedestrian bridge, rising skeleton of steel and cedar, mirrored the yarn's pathway. Children watched riveters while continuing to knit alongside, their small voices mixing with hammers in a duet of building. On the day the stone pillars were capped, a ceremony convened mid-valley. To christen the structure, both grandmothers and both granddaughters stood at the center, scissors poised. Not to snip the ribbon, but to snip a single loose thread from the scarf and weave it into the bridge's final joint, symbolizing that the old soft bridge would now live inside the stronger one. Lark, now slightly taller, asked, "Will we still knit together after the bridge is done?" Mira smiled, smoothing her granddaughter's hair. "Always. Bridges be blankets, don't they? Winter's return." That evening, under Lantern Festival, revived across both towns. The valley glowed. Paper lights bobbed above rooftops, mirrored by their reflections on water. The scarf shimmered along the riverbank inside protective glass, preserved but never stilled. Caretakers rotated the display so each story stripe faced outward in turn. As revelers danced, Mira and Alma stole a quiet moment on the new bridge. Leaning over the rail, they watched their reflections ripple beneath. Alma breathed. "Crazy, isn't it? A quarrel older than our wrinkles, undone by 2 children and some yarn." Mira nodded, fingers sweeping the balustrade where the preserved thread lay. It started with you and me, falling out over something larger than us, fitting it ends with them, our grandchildren, making something larger than the quarrel. They embraced, shoulder to shoulder, listening to the river at peace, unnamed yet intimately known. Lark and Sarah bounded up, cheeks blazing with excitement. Grandmas, Sarah said, we're teaching the little ones to knit bracelets tomorrow. One color for each tale of kindness. Want to join? Mira winked at Alma. Do we? They followed the girls into the lantern glow. Later, when laughter hushed, Mira sat on a bench facing both towns, needles flashing again. Lark curled beside her, yawning but determined to finish another square. What story shall we add now? The child murmured. Mira gazed at the arc of lanterns, the steady bridge, the preserved scarf, the mingled crowds. How about today's? She whispered. The story of people who believed warmth could stretch across water like sunrise, and found they were right. Lark nodded, eyelids fluttering. Mira guided her small hands through the loops. The scarf in progress pooled across their laps. This one, not meant for bridging, but for wrapping around the shoulders of whoever next felt cold. Above them, stars knit their own silver braid across the heavens, ancient and forgiving. On earth below, two towns once severed by suspicion now shared river songs again. Knots once tightened by fear lay loosened, spun into something new, something long enough, soft enough, strong enough to carry every story home.